Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Very nice to meet you all, and thank you for coming, and thank you for bearing with us while we waited a little bit, because our fourth speaker has got her luggage lost by I don't know which airline, but as you can understand, it's a little complicated not to have your clothes at an event like this. And we told her, look, here's the MoMA card. We can afford Uniqlo, and you can go and go crazy with it. And she said, well, we'll take it from there. But anyway, she'll be here very, very soon. But in the meantime, I would like to welcome you all. My name is Paola Antonelli. I'm a senior curator of architecture and design and director of R&D here at MoMA. And together with my co-organizer, Alexandra Midal, and with Michelle Millar-Fisher and a wonderful team of great, great people, we have put together this kind of folly for tonight and tomorrow that asks the question, is fashion modern? It's the first time for me personally, and it's not the first time, but it's one of the first times for MoMA to delve into fashion or into the world of garments. So we have started early to do research for an exhibition that will happen next year, at the end of next year, that is called Items, with the subtitle, Is Fashion Modern? And the question that we are posing to you and to a great group of advisors and to a great group of speakers is exactly that. What does it mean to be modern today, and is fashion modern today? MoMA, as I mentioned to you, does not really do fashion, or didn't, but that's already a euphemism, doesn't do fashion at all. But we have a few pieces in the collection, kind of mysterious appearances in the collection. We have a Fortuny dress that has been in the collection since the 1980s. It was a gift. And then we have the beautiful Epoch kind of line of clothing, if you want to call it so, by Sei Miyake and Dai Fujiwara. We have a Fruit of the Loom t-shirt that I kind of snuck into the collection when I did a show called Humble Masterpieces in 2004. And then we have a great 4D printed dress by Nervous System. That's a company in Cambridge, Massachusetts. But besides that, there's not really any fashion in the MoMA collection. Why? Well, it's a question that I posed to one of the people who hired me, Philip Johnson, when I was hired. And his response, in typical Philip Johnson fashion, kind of provocative and also not telling you how things really are, was, well, my dear Paola, we wouldn't want our lady trustees to have to choose between us and the Met when they want to bequeath their Halstons. And I said, okay, that makes a lot of sense. But then he sobered up and he told me, no, the truth is that it's because fashion is synonym with ephemerality. Fashion is something that is not timeless, but rather of the time, that expires in 6 months, and modern means timeless. Interestingly, in 1944, MoMA produced this quite beautiful show by Bernard Rudofsky entitled Are Clothes Modern? Bernard Rudofsky was this itinerating Viennese curator, very intellectual and very curmudgeonly, as some of our advisors noted by rereading the catalog, that decided to do a show that critiqued the way clothes were made at that time. It was almost the end of the Second World War, and somehow many people could not really suffer the kind of craziness and the kind of constriction that so much fashion, both for men and for women, still demanded. So the exhibition was not about fashion, but rather about the body and about how the body was not fit for those clothes. And it was an exhibition that was, as you can see, in black and white, even in reality, not only in the pictures, and that was very, very humorous and at the same time critical. You see here illustrations that showed how many buttons and pockets men used to wear every day on them. And what you see up there at the top right is a section through the midriff of a man, fully dressed man at that time, that showed all the layers that the man was supposed to wear. And it was quite beautiful because Rudofsky himself started talking about Cinderella as a metaphor for how so much fashion was. That image that you see at the bottom was not in the Rudofsky catalog. We just wanted to convey more emotionally what that meant. But you see, next morning the prince went to his father, the king, and said to him, "No one shall be my wife but she whose foot this golden slipper fits." So at that time in history, the body had to fit the clothes. And that's what Rudowski did with the sculptor Costantino Nivola. They produced these beautiful plaster models of what the body should look like to fit the clothes that were given to the body. And you see the absurdity here is absolutely crystal clear. So it's about the tension. It's about what befits what. Is fashion modern? Are clothes modern? At that time, modernity meant being of the moment and being forward-looking, being comfortably projected towards the future. And as you can see, this was not really a comfortable way to move towards the future. So at that time, the question remained unanswered, but it was put there as a critical question. And Rudowski is the same curator that in 1964 organized the exhibition Architecture Without Architects, that kind of put the same thorn in the side and the same kind of like flea in the mind of so many architects. Does architecture need to be vernacular, need to be spontaneous for it to be truly of the moment and of the place? After that, MoMA didn't really touch fashion anymore. PS1 did before it was part of MoMA. In the 1980s, the beautifully named Hollywood DeRusso was the curator for a series of exhibitions, one on Betsy Johnson, for instance, and another one on Homer Lane's collection of Charles James fashion. Homer Lane worked as an apprentice in Charles James' office and therefore collected all these garments that were shown by Hollywood DeRusso in the Queens, in the Long Island City school that had been founded as an as a cultural center just a few years before. And it was very funny because there was this alternative positioning of PS1 and the fashion shows there, and DeRusso would say, it costs $500 to buy a dress for the Met Gala, and we're giving $500. And we're giving it to you for $1.20, which was the cost of a subway ticket. And then more recently, Greater New York and other exhibitions by my colleagues at MoMA PS1 this time have shown fashion, especially New York-based fashion designers such as Zlata and Mary Ping from Slow and Steady Wins the Race. So there has been some appearance of fashion, but not that much. What is interesting is that the same preoccupation that Rudowski had in 1944, which was that of giving more status to fashion, is still alive today. Look at this. Rudowski wrote in 1944, "It is strange that dress has been generally denied the status of art when it is actually a most happy summation of aesthetic, philosophic, and psychological components." And then he went on griping about sculpture and painting instead being considered so serious. It sounds like me, only I would put design instead of fashion. But he was complaining about this in 1944, and just a few weeks ago, Vanessa Friedman wrote something similar. She was talking about Lady Gaga not being a muse, but rather being an enabler of fashion, which was very interesting. But she wrote, the point was pretty clear that designers are legitimate artists with their own specific aesthetic, and it would be disrespectful to try to do what they do or to alter it. It is, in a sense, a continuation of her campaign, that was Lady Gaga's campaign, to elevate the outcast, believe it or not. For, while fashion may be famous for its elitism, it has long been seen and often sees itself as the stepchild of the art world, the less worthy creative form. We all have our complexes. Well, my complex is design. And I believe that fashion, when it meets design, it becomes even more powerfully connected with the real world and has even more agency. And it's something that we will discuss tomorrow and also in the exhibition itself. So the greatest ally for fashion, rather than art only, is design, because of how it can penetrate people's lives. No matter what, fashion seems to be in crisis, so they say. And, not being a fashion insider, I can only take at face value what I read, but I want to interrogate people who really are in the know. But lately, you've seen so many articles about it. Apparently, fashion is dead again. This was Lee Edelcourt that was talking about it in ID magazine. Then Vestoy, what's wrong with the fashion industry? It was in your reading assignments. I hope you've all read everything that we sent you. So it was a great round table. But the conversation is there. Clearly, no matter what, something is the matter. And it's interesting for us to be able to discuss it. You know, the CFDA just published, well, not just, it was a few weeks ago, but it was a new Examining the Future of New York Fashion Week, a report that pointed at the issues that are critical for fashion today. And, you know, they're very much inside issues, but they're incredibly interesting. You know, no downtime for designers. There are like 6 collections a year if we follow the normal calendar. Pressure for young designers to invest in a show. Disproportionate investment in the show versus the impact, and so on and so forth. So there are many points that are crucial. So we're asking now, Rudowski used to ask, are clothes modern? And he was not the only one to think that way. There was a lot of studies that had happened already about the psychology of clothes and about the anatomy of clothes. But today, we're asking, is fashion modern? So it's not only the clothes themselves, it's the infrastructure, it's the system. How can we evaluate it using a design lens, not just an artistic or a stylistic lens? And then we added the word items. Is fashion modern? Because we would like to look at clothes and at fashion from a design standpoint, thinking of the objects and the way they occupy space in the world and the way they fit and they push people forward. The accent will be on fashion and modern. And by the way, I would like to tell you that I want to credit my good friend and colleague Glenn Adamson, who's going to be very soon the former director of the Museum of Art and Design, for pushing me to use the word fashion in the subtitle. I have to say also the director of MoMA pushed me, but Glenn made me really, really comfortable with the idea of asking the question in this new way. So fashion and modern. Fashion, I don't have to tell you what fashion means. Actually, you should tell me, but we often think of fashion as a popular style and as an industry, a style that is popular at a particular time. But what is really crucial and what MoMA can contribute is a discussion on the idea of modern. So modern versus modernity versus modernism, that's how so many curators here spend their time, arguing the difference between them. It's the truth. So my favorite is modern with the small m, which means now, related to present times. That means up to date. That means a departure from tradition sometimes. That is what MoMA used to be when it was founded in 1929, and it was supposed to show, display, promote the art of our time. So this is an attitude that is timeless, that keeps on being renewed. We can be modern today just like we could be modern in 1929. Of course, the idea of modernity has taken on a very different value. And you know, you see here a Martin Heidegger quote that talks about the fact that modernity is a mostly revolutionary idea that is about detaching oneself from tradition, whether the tradition is Christianity or it is the 18th or 19th century. So it's about moving forward in the telling of history. Modernity, furthermore, is a quintessentially Western construct, and more recently there's been discussions about many parallel modernities. So the fact that we have discovered, and not only at the Museum of Modern Art, but in the whole world, that the story that we have been telling has been quite segregated geographically, and that we have to understand and study the modernities that happened in other parts of the world. This is also what we're occupying ourselves a lot with, which is very good. And then there's modernism with a capital M, and that's the style, that's the belonging to a particular era in the 1930s and 1940s, and it's exquisitely, for architects and designers, connected to an idea of progress that unfortunately has been judged unsustainable in the 1960s and 1970s. But you know, we can go on discussing all this. What we want to try and apply in this particular exhibition is the modern with the small m, the attitude that is progressive and constructive. And that has been beautifully also explained by Marshall Berman in this very poetic quote that I will let you read in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 seconds yourself. It's quite beautiful. It talks about the maelstrom of modernity, about the fact that one becomes engulfed in this sense of future. So, is fashion modern? You know, the great Pierre Berger once, he was very tarte-tongued, as you might know. He was Yves Saint Laurent's partner. He said once that any fashion that engaged itself with the Middle East was not dignified and could not be considered fashion. And it's very interesting to see how instead today so many designers are embracing, sometimes with very interesting results like this Dolce & Gabbana abaya, are embracing the Middle East with a passion. Modern means recognizing new realities, new geographies, and recognizing also new models of human beings. This is Jimena Machado, I think is her last name. I had written it well, but she's a model that is in the last Target commercial. She's on a wheelchair, and she is modeling pretty much everywhere. She's very much in demand. Is fashion modern means taking into account also the fact that a dress shirt can be racist. This is a very interesting happenstance. It's a startup that tried to find an algorithm to enable human beings, especially men, to send in pretty rough measurements and get a perfectly fitted shirt. So they could just take the height and the waistline, etc. And thanks to this algorithm, the company could fit the shirt perfectly. But the algorithm tended to separate between races very, very soon. The same that happened with the algorithm that became racist on Twitter. So it's about engaging with race. Being modern means also dealing with the idea of clothing haul, with this kind of public demonstration of one's new acquisitions and new passions. Being modern means dealing also with fluidity, dealing with ambiguity and ambivalence in a way that is not anymore binary, that really moves away from past ideas and instead embraces what I call almost like a quantum dimension of design. Being modern means also dealing with science in a new way. You see here the work, for instance, of Neri Oxman and the work of Tony Dunn and Fiona Raby, great speculative designers that try to think of what a possible future could be for fashion to integrate itself with the human organism and possibly also with nature. Being modern means, of course, also looking for new ways of manufacturing and testing ways that might not seem viable but might happen to be viable in the future. You see here quite a few examples of 3D printed dresses. The slide up there at the top right is snatched from the Manus Ex Machina exhibition up at the Met, which is a wonderful show that juxtaposes the work of contemporary 3D printed objects and designers with instead work that is made by hand in the past. And you see here work by S4 and work, the kinematics dress that is in the MoMA collection. So it's about testing new ways and understanding especially that being part of the world today means also taking an ethical stance. And one cannot just look at the object at face value, but must understand where the object comes from and the implication of the object itself. So it's about discussing in the circumstance and in the context of a show that might be about fashion, also what is behind fashion, and also asking questions that might be really uncomfortable. For instance, what is behind the making of a t-shirt, as has been discussed in many also interactive features. So tonight we have 4 great speakers speaking with us, 10 minutes each, and then we'll have a conversation. We'll gather some of the questions that came from the audience using the Twitter hashtag #ItemsMoMA. I don't know if any of you sent them. We got quite a few questions, so we'll pose them also to our speakers. And we will have a quite quiet evening. Instead, tomorrow it'll be a tour de force of 26 7-minute vignettes from A to Z with different items considered in the same critical way. The speakers that we have with us tonight are quite fantastic. We're going to start with Penny Martin, who is the founder and editor of the Gentlewoman. It's a wonderful publication that's based in London. You have the pamphlets with all the bios, so I won't recite them all, but Penny will really help us think the question through again. Is fashion modern? We're going to then continue with Alphonso McClendon. Alphonso McClendon from Drexel University is a scholar who specialized in the jazz age and fashion in the jazz age. And he's going to talk about the issue of fashion being modern as related to race and gender. After Alphonso, hopefully she'll make it in time, is Omoyemi Akerele, the founder of Lagos Design Week. And she's going to talk about being modern as creating new landscapes and new geographies for fashion. And last but not least, my great friend Kim Hastreiter, who's the co-founder and co-editor of Paper Magazine, that's going to talk about generational differences in fashion and the perception of fashion. So I would like to call here Penny Martin, or call there Penny Martin to start, and I thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Paola. Good evening. When Radowski wrote in praise of the dress reform movement in his 1944 treatise that Paola just mentioned, noting that their articles had been published in progressive magazines that were a far cry from the commercial trash of modern fashion editors, I'm sure that he couldn't have envisaged that a trash publishing modern fashion editor would be invited here tonight to speak in response to his thesis, and yet here I am. Paola's recasting of his famous question, "Are clothes modern?" to "Is fashion modern?" is a timely one, I think. As the online flyer for tonight's Salon states, an object-centered formal analysis discussion of clothing can't begin to capture a garment's relationship with modern life without reference to an extremely sophisticated and slippery world of image, communications, and commerce that enables the contemporary fashion system as we know it. But it's not just the widening focus from clothes to industry that feels so relevant. It's the interrogatory tone of the query. Is fashion modern? It's a question fashion's been asking itself, as the industry's commercial structures and working practices have come under increasing scrutiny in recent months. Never was there a better time, it seems, for us to be pausing to consider how fashion operates at this moment and painting a picture of how it might better serve the needs of the modern age. What's striking about the period of time since or between MoMA's last fashion exhibit in the mid-1940s and today is that it's the exact same time frame in which fashion design was transformed into a global industry. In the late 1940s and throughout the 1950s, Christian Dior took advantage of political changes in Europe and the Marshall Plan's encouragement of American spending in Europe to make his couture house into a blueprint for what we would now consider an international brand. With the development of air travel and the acceleration of media, not only was he able to open boutiques and show his collections abroad, but also to bypass French employment regulations and currency and import restrictions to cut the cost of production and enable overseas clients to get their money into the country. Is it sounding familiar? By the mid-1950s, Dior owned 8 different Christian Dior companies, whilst 16 others were making his products under franchise, that word franchise. And the model for how fashion houses would run their businesses over the subsequent 30 years had been cast. Flash forward to 1984, and we see a complete reversal when the French businessman Bernard Arnault bought Christian Dior and set about buying back the many clothing, accessory, and fragrance licenses that had been bought in the intervening years. It was a highly complex and costly endeavour, and actually one that still goes on to this day. There's loads of companies still buying back their fragrance licenses. But one that created the foundations of Arnault's luxury group LVMH, and indeed set a precedent for how the major fashion conglomerates would go about regaining control of the massive, often unwieldy fashion businesses that had been built. This process of rationalization and centralization has been one of the most influential factors in shaping fashion over the past 3 decades, and it's where we find ourselves now. Now, not everybody would agree that this shift has been a great thing for fashion. If you've been following fashion commentary, as Paola mentioned, in the newspapers over the past year or so, and if you subscribe especially to the trade news wires such as Business of Fashion and Women's Wear Daily, you'd think that the fashion industry was fascinated with its own demise. Reports are full of references to this broken fashion system, which it would seem nobody wants to be part of. In the past year, a good number of leading fashion designers have left their positions in major brands. Raf Simons at Dior, Albert Elbaz at Lanvin, Alexander Wang at Balenciaga, Eddie Slimane at Saint Laurent among them. And at the same time, many of our greatest living talents have parted company from the industry completely. Martin Margiela, Helmut Lang, Jill Sander. So what could be the cause of this? So we saw the chart. Many have cited the accelerated pace caused by digital as the culprit, that we're making many more products than there's an appetite to or time to consume in this cycle, or 4 or more collections per year. And then there's the increased number of fashion shows for press and buyers to attend. I myself attended 136 shows and presentations during last Fashion Week. It was a very busy February. We're starting to see attempts to answer some of this with companies such as Burberry, Gucci, and this season Bottega Veneta combining their women and men's presentations, and you'll have seen all the reports about this. Yet this in turn has thrown the business into a further spin about worries that this will set a precedent and put unfair pressure on smaller designers or wholesalers. I could go on. Let's just say that viewed from the industry's own perspective, it really does sound like dark days. What must have crossed your mind, however, in listening to all of this, is that not one mention has yet been made of fashion design itself. And for me, this is one of the characteristics of fashion culture of the past 15 years. And a very modern one, you might add. It's now possible to consume fashion without paying much attention to clothes at all, or indeed coming into contact with them. With the rise of fashion on the internet and as reality TV, it's become a subject of mass entertainment. This has coincided with a sort of bottoming out of content in fashion design, where designers' time, as referenced on Paola's chart, and especially their ideas, have been stretched exceedingly thin to meet the demands of fast fashion, the increasing demands. With ever more media platforms to feed, the industry itself has become the news. Its photographers and editors, once behind-the-scenes creatives, are now represented as celebrities. Magazine houses and fashion exhibitions are now the subject of documentary films, and the fashion's trade press has become fixated on its own internal processes. One of the most powerful channels of communication at the moment is indeed called the business of fashion, a daily newswire that's a non-stop source of analysis of career moves, company implosions, mergers and IPOs. And I don't need to tell you that many of the newspapers whose critics were once the uppermost authority on a collection's relevance or a designer's aptitude are rapidly losing their audiences. It all begs the question of where we should now look for those qualities of beauty, identity, critique, and dare I say it, exclusivity that once characterized the world of clothing design in Christian Dior and Radowski's day. Do they even exist in modern fashion? Well, I'm here to tell you, of course, yes. If you look beyond the fraught, inward-looking media culture created by the past 30 years of centralization and digitization in fashion, there are many strong models in the field of design, brand development, publishing and retail that point to a sustainable commercial future without relinquishing the creative ambition and wonder that makes it such a thrilling world to work in, and it is. But what unites the examples that I'm showing you tonight is their distance from the corporate fashion world, and in many cases their skepticism towards the digital culture that's hastened its arrival. This isn't to say that the designers pictured here are entirely independent of it, of course. Even those companies that seem to engender the most revolutionary spirit in current fashion, such as the Vetements Collective or Raf Simons, are made commercially viable by those designers' work for bigger houses. Demna Gvasalia of Vetements is also the creative director of Balenciaga, owned by Francois Pinault's Kering Group. And Simons, of course, was the creative director of Dior until recently, owned by Bernard Arnault's LVMH. This said, both have made enormous mark on the industry through experimentation, only possible at their own smaller companies, through questioning the currency of garments versus fashion. Vetements, after all, just means clothes. The value of a wardrobe of clothes versus a collection, the importance of history versus novelty. And in all this, of course, they owe a massive debt to the much-missed Martin Margiela. The use of history to appear modern is perhaps most pronounced in some of the more progressive young companies' branding strategies, particularly interesting in the context of a talk aiming to make up for lost time at MoMA since the 1940s. Many designers focus on the British modernist design in their shop fittings, and in some instances, their collection showcases. Pictured on the left is Jonathan Anderson's cruise presentation for his brand J.W. Anderson, which he staged at Kettle's Yard, a modernist art and design collection in Cambridge. And you can perhaps see from the rather awkward body language of the fashion press in the picture that they were quite surprised to find themselves out of London and in such a sort of surprising context. It certainly struck a thoughtful departure from the growing trend for major fashion brands like Louis Vuitton, Gucci and Chanel to stage flashy international spectacles to preview their increasingly important cruise and pre-collection presentations. On the right is a presentation that Anderson staged in the showroom of the furniture dealers that supplies all the arts and crafts furniture that he uses to furnish his Loewe stores. Loewe, of course, being the LVMH leatherware brand that he works for in addition to his own name line. You see how this works. As such, J.W. Anderson's fantastically modest presentations are an inspired way of capturing attention when working on such a smaller scale. And is there anything more unfashionable in fashion's mid-century modern obsessed world than Victorian furniture? Perhaps the most overt riposte to online fashion can be found in independent publishing, and I know we have some other editors in the house tonight. Not just the pace and demand of digital, but also rejection of its form and aesthetic. Here I should perhaps declare an interest. For full disclosure, I, of course, edit an independently published magazine, The Gentlewoman. But there are many other titles, printed and digital, that share our enthusiasm for long-form, personality-centred journalism, not content, candid photography, a love of paper, quality printing, and ambitious graphic design. In a climate that seems to require less and better in everything, the periodical nature of printed magazines, with periods of silence between issues to read and think about them, seems increasingly precious. That analogue world is also treasured by the most innovative retailers, which is the last category that I'm going to look at tonight. It's palpable at Dover Street Market, the multi-brand shop originally located in London's Mayfair and now with outstations here in New York, as well as in Tokyo. An extension of Comme des Garçons' guerrilla store concept of the early noughties, whereby they took over disused retail spaces in obscure city locations to sell their vintage stock. In 2004, the company offered other brands a platform to come into and participate in their contemporary working of the traditional market stall at Dover Street, as well as to enjoy the imprimatur of the industry's most respected and powerful independent fashion label, Comme des Garçons. It's important to note that the company, however, does run an e-commerce site and therefore hasn't turned its back on digital as such. Yet with a decidedly vernacular shop fit and the inclusion of homewares companies such as Labour and Weight, Dover Street Market has a strong connection with the ethos and vocabulary of the branding that we looked at with J.W. Anderson, say, and the design approach seen at Vetements and Margiela. And for me, this is what defines the truly forward-looking examples of contemporary fashion. They're a pragmatic band of optimists and as such have learned to work in concert with the modern fashion system. They're using those corporate structures that enable them to run viable businesses in a terrifyingly competitive market. It's brutal, whilst quietly turning their backs on the conservatism and deathly cold aesthetic brought by centralisation and digitisation. Revelling in the authenticity of garments, as opposed to the cheap buzz of fast fashion, of intimate salon presentations rather than the tyranny of the runway, of carefully published journalism, not random content, and of good old-fashioned shopkeeping on top of e-commerce. Tomorrow's brightest fashion stars are reconnecting with the integrity of the era that preceded online and corporate fashion, and they're taking it with them into the future. Thank you.
You're looking great. I'm glad that you're great.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Pardon me if I'm a bit, out of breath. It's an evening of so many firsts. It's the first time I've traveled in decades of flying, and my bag didn't arrive. So I was a bit flustered, and it's also the first time I've had to fly on my birthday. I usually on Friday. Oh my goodness, Paola! Happy birthday. So but I'm really happy to be here. Thank you so much. So redefining African fashion. For me, Michelle, just a few pointers on how to work this.
Oh, the big green button.
Awesome,
Yes.
Thank you. So for me, my name is Omoyemi Akerele. I'm the director and founder of Lagos Fashion and Design Week, and I live in Lagos, Nigeria. So for me tonight, talking about the question is fashion modern. It's really it's a topic that I find really close to my heart. And why is that? Because African fashion is just at the cusp. It's right there. It's at that point where we need to be really careful in terms of what we do, how it's projected, how it's perceived by people on a global scale, and of course how the designers, ensure that the work that. Okay.
The big green button.
Big.
Green arrow.
Awesome. So So I just thought, the perfect starting point would be to take us back on a journey that spans about 500 years ago, because it's when we see so much either on the internet or runway shows from designers that are African, sometimes you question and wonder, what is that about? You wonder where it's from and where you've seen it. Yes, you have seen it, but probably expressed in a completely different way. So that's the picture of a man, in Kano State. Kano State is in Nigeria. It's in the northern part of Nigeria. And the dyeing, different cultures, different countries have their own tie and dye process. And of course, we have ours that spans like hundreds of years. And of course, in going around about it, you see the indigo, which is one of our prized possessions because it's still something that's tangible and you can hold on to. And then when you see a designer like Makio, who's brought it to life in a garment that's just right there in the middle, and who's been able to try to explain her own evolution process in coming from all of that indigo, in all of that tradition, in all of that wax that's been touched by hand, that's been, seemingly influenced the work that she's done as a designer is something that's really worth thinking about in answering the question, is fashion modern? So for us, it's very important to mention that the connection between our traditional African heritage and its reinterpretation into contemporary fashion today, in defining African fashion as we know it, has long been established. So it's nothing new. It's something that you've seen before. After all, our forefathers had the indigo fabric and cloth. If you go a little bit further down Western Africa and you go to South Africa, you meet a designer called Laduma. And what's interesting about him is that he's been able to tap into his own heritage as well, his own culture, to find out what's unique about it. It's the pattern, it's the print. He's been able to rework it. He's been able to reinterpret it into something that's seemingly modern. And why is it modern? Is it because it's today? Or is it because, it's of the time? Or is it because of the way it's being consumed? Or the purpose that it's being used for? But that's Laduma's story. So now Laduma, you can shop Laduma at United Arrows in Japan. He's come a long way from South Africa. So this ongoing interplay between contemporary fashion in Africa and historic cultural references, and the historic cultural reference points have contributed significantly to redefining the African fashion narrative. It's a word that's been brandished everywhere. You keep asking, you can't help but ask yourself, what is African fashion? What does that really mean? So you look at a designer like Jewel by Lisa Folawiyo, and what's interesting about her is, yes, she's working with a fabric that's seemingly ubiquitous, and that's the Ankara fabric. And you think you've seen it, I mean, it's the subject of so many stories and steeped in history. You begin to question, where is it from? Where's the origin? And there's this designer who's been able to sort of reinterpret it and rework it into something using her own design sensibilities, using craftsmanship, embellishment, introducing texture into something that, if you look at the picture on the extreme, that decades ago it was just something that people wore randomly. So it's this cotton fabric that's suddenly been given a new lease of life, a new breath of life. So does that make it modern? Those are the questions that, we think and we want to ask ourselves. Or is it someone like Diola Sego, whose mother actually was one of a very important cloth weaver in Nigeria? We call this Ashoke. And what makes Ashoke really, really unique and special is, imagine hundreds and hundreds of yards of silk fabrics woven together. Imagine the patterns that have to go with it. Imagine the colors. Imagine putting it together. Imagine what the people, the communities that do the weaving, who pass this down from generation to generation, how do they teach their children? And in teaching them, how do designers today come in contact with such fabrics and decide, this is going to be my medium of expression, and this is how I'm going to interpret it into something that can be consumed today, or something that's of today's time, which probably begs the question, is it modern? So you see the looms, and then you see, Diola Sego, she's shown at New York Fashion Week before, several times, I think. And then, of course, you see what she's doing today with the head wraps and, going back into it, the silk. How do we make it modern? How do we bring it to life? But that doesn't take away from it. It doesn't take away from the questions that people keep asking about African fashion and what does it really mean? Is it fashion from the continent? Is it fashion that's inspired by the continent? Does it have to be steeped in tradition or cultural heritage for it to be African? Does it even have to be modern? What is modern? Does it have to be contemporary even? So is it fashion designed by Africans in diaspora? Is it in diaspora? Is it fashion designed by Africans from the continent? What is African fashion? Is it something that, has become commercially relevant on a global scale? Bearing in mind that, we've all seen designers from Yves Saint Laurent to John Galliano to even Vogue in 1967 with African carrying, work from the continent. So you ask yourself, why has it become such a talking point today? Why has it become suddenly within our consciousness? Is that globalization? Is it the fact that everything is available in nanoseconds on a global scale around the world? So what brings us here? What are we talking about? If you think about a designer like brother Aurora James, who's not she's not African, but what she does is really unique and special in the sense that it is made on the continent. It's unique. She's giving sort of like footwear new modern interpretation. That's the word, modern. Modern interpretation. Versions of shoes that you've seen in the past that people have, used before suddenly come into life, and in such a way that not only do you see it on a global fashion scale, imagine all the work that's gone into it. Imagine the fact that the shoes are produced within the continent. It gives jobs to people. So it's contributing to the value chain. But she's not African. So does that mean it's not African fashion? Those are the questions that we want to think about. So if you think about a designer like Lalesso, she's based in South Africa. And for Lalesso, her story is different. She lives in South Africa, and then when you meet her, she has a South African partner. It is made on the continent, but is she, people keep asking, does that make her African? Yes, it is. The value chain is present. It's part of it. They have a story. And definitely, when you think about the silhouettes and you think about the colors and you think about the way everything sort of comes together in that vibrant way that tells you about African culture, which is very vibrant, then it helps paint a better picture. Or when you think about Durolo, who he's of Nigerian heritage, but he's a British designer. And you think about his references, the reference points, if you think about his collection season after season, how it's evolved and how it's, so strong. It's reminiscent of something you've seen. It's of today. 2 minutes. But at the same time, it's so moving on quickly, what makes African fashion modern? So, that's the whole essence of it. So if you think about Lanre da Silva Jai, who was at Dolce & Gabbana, or you think about Tiffany Amber at La Reina Shante, and you wonder, okay, how do people relate to this, either with the fabric or the textures or the mix of colors, and you just, look at it and think about the effect globalization has had on the African fashion industry, industrialization, consumer culture. So it makes you question. So if they're still referencing culture and heritage from last hundreds of years, so what then makes it, and if you think about the fact that technology, so it's not like we have laser printing on that sort of scale, what then makes it modern? Is it the way it's consumed? So is it the impact of consumer culture? Is it social media? Is it the fact that, everything's available everything's suddenly become more available? Is it the fact that people have been able to take it from, initially the made-to-measure culture in Africa was really strong, but now there's an increasing demand for ready-to-wear? Are we talking about the fact that, today, with e-commerce and urbanization, clothing and, it's suddenly become more available and people can sort of touch and feel it and it's tangible in that sort of way? Or if you think about the rise of stores, so people are gradually moving from that informal market structure to a formal retail structure where people actually have stores that you can go to shop in. So, it helps you think when you see photos like this of a designer from the 70s, Sade Thomas Farm, and sort of what she did then, and then you sort of look at what's happening now. So what has changed? So everything looks familiar and it looks similar, but it's been reworked in such a way that it's suddenly become a bit more contemporary. So yes, African fashion is subject to constant change and it's influenced by some of the factors that we've listed. But when we think about it in reality, it's still an adoption of older modes to suit new purpose. So yes, it's something that's existed before now, and we hope that as it morphs into something that's gradually becoming globally accepted as African fashion, we just need to make sure that its essence is not eroded into nothing or meaninglessness, because the very strength we believe lies in what's old, its strength lies in the traditional, its strength lies in what's characterized as antique or antiquated, and heritage that spans hundreds and hundreds of years. For we think that's the strength, that's what makes it unique, that's what makes it different, that's what's going to make it stand out. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying all African designers reference some culture or heritage in their work, but I'm just saying that there's a certain, even if it's in the silhouette or in the expression, there's a certain sense of consciousness within it that comes to life sometimes. They don't necessarily have to tell you their story, but that's what makes it unique. So the next time we see like a pit like this, a dying pit, and you wonder about what's happening in that state where that used to create jobs for like hundreds or thousands of people, and you think about the fact that it's no more today because industrialization has gradually taken that away, which is okay, because at the end of the day, we need to move on. But it's about ensuring that there's a balance, that we don't lose that. It's about ensuring that, you can still hold on to parts of that and everything is not completely lost in the quest for what's modern or what's industrial or in the quest for globalization. So Africa still needs to hold on to what its heritage is, what its identity is, and what makes it unique. So the next time you see an indigo cloth like that, which is being brought to life, which has been brought to life by this designer Makio, it helps you remember that it's not just a dress. It's a dress, but it's steeped in history, it's steeped in culture, it's steeped in heritage, it's steeped in generations, it's steeped in work that's been passed down from one generation to the next generation, and hopefully to the global scale, everyone has a deeper appreciation for what it truly is. So that's my view. So if you strip the collection down and look at the pieces, and if you take away the fact that some of them are made from indigo, which is a part of what we're talking about, and you look at the silhouette, and you look at the element of it, and you think about, let's pick one, let's talk about ruffles, and think about when ruffles first came into our consciousness, probably in the 60s or the 70s. And then think about what the designer's done. So she's not only referenced Western culture, she's also introduced the part of who she truly is, her DNA, and what makes her brand her brand. And hopefully that begins to paint a picture of what we think fashion is and how modernity comes to play. So no, it's not modern in the sense that you haven't seen it before, but it's modern in the sense that it's of today, it's of the time, and it's of now. Thank you very much.
Good evening. Fashion has been an influential and transformative system where distinct dress and dressing equate to economic and cultural capital. In modern times, the freedom to accentuate the beautiful has been an indicator of class, success, and authority. Fashion, an often unconstrained movement, has touched many cultures and time periods, framing identities and societal implications. It visualizes the answer to who am I, who are you, and where am I going, whether from the elite, the bourgeois, or the marginalized. Affluent classes for centuries have wielded garments and appearance as conspicuous display of authority and designation as arbiters. For public view, the artifacts of dress and the act of dressing are social, where the codes and outcomes of fashion are perceived, experienced, and consumed by others. Fashion has had the power to affirm, challenge, and alter traditions. These assemblages to the body with textiles and clothing and modifications to the body via jewelry, accessories, cuts and decoration to the hair, and tightening or loosening of the torso and limbs were deliberate, valued, and situated among entrenched hierarchy and white male hegemony. This disparity of power, alongside false signifiers of liberty, steered marginalized classes to imitate, reject, and transform the dress and power of privileged groups through the merger of art, culture, and agency, thus creating new centers or origins of fashion. Historically, in these spaces, voices of agreement, opposition, and rebellion and revolution in society are awakened. This modern movement, inclusive of fashion, brings imitation, appropriation, inspiration, and concludes in fragmentation, where newer forms or challenges are discovered. For instance, in the late 19th century, African Americans brazenly articulated modernity through ragtime and jazz appearance as they pursued human rights. Here I posit thematic published sheet music covers that depicted an affinity for Black mores and fashion within a racially charged environment. Illustrations with wit reference the dress and behavior of aristocratic displays, also known as dicty, pompous, and highfalutin demeanor. Antagonistic and positive imagery of modernity was evidenced as the white majority showed attentiveness into the facets of Black culture. Equally during this period, women projected demonstratively their pursuits of equality, as well hidden desires and dreams, as cited by scholar Elizabeth Wilson. The progression was obstructed by measures of morality through conduct and dress. At times, their choices disrupted, disturbed, and provoked, inciting leaders to liken short skirts and bobbed hair to those in ancient fashion who had lost their character. The sassy fashion and habits of fast women became culpable targets for depravity and sin. In addition, varieties of these racy women populated numerous Hollywood film narratives in the 1930s as blame for male insanity. Nonetheless, the forward sensibility continued as social ideals, traditions, and modesty shifted. A consistent strand that made fashion modern in the past was the jubilation, the struggle, the pursuit, the testing, and the defiance linked to human freedom, artistic expression, and cultural evolution. In American history, these strivings are documented through Native American conflicts, African slavery and emancipation, and European immigration, civil rights, women's rights, gay rights, Black power movements, and youth uprisings. Crucial to the occurrence of fashion was individual authenticity and group action. The power flowed from cultural improvisation and poetic expression. 2, influence was gained from tenacity and understanding of consequences that considered the whole. In the mid-20th century, African American males created alterations in speech, gesture, posture, dress, and appearance that in some was labeled cool. Author Bell Hooks defined this cool manifestation in the latter part of the century as a response to Black hardship. Cool, a product of inequity, equally referenced modernity, with such actions interpreted as forward-thinking, innovative, and seeking to move beyond a current doctrine. The next couple of slides, I'm going to show you the artwork of David Stone Martin, who illustrated many album covers from the 1940s and 50s. Typically, the dress and behavior was observed as composed and poised, challenging Black male stereotypes, saturated with qualities of being a servant, buffoon, and sporting man. At times, cool was brazen, provocative, and narcissistic, but always stemming from historical and cultural struggle. Mid-century performers adopted eccentric behaviors that fashioned unique vernacular, dress, and music intended to restrict, but it actually drew further outside inspection and imitation. In 1959, trumpeter Miles Davis experienced the collision of modernity and race when he was beaten by New York City police for standing outside of the jazz club Birdland. Skin color and race eclipsed dress and the distinction of wearing a suit or formal wear. African American fashion outcomes consisted of influences on popular culture and media, integration on the stage, increased salaries, mixed audiences, and disruptions to Jim Crow. Essential to these gains was the expression of modernity in appearance, conduct, and language as unapologetic signifiers. Presently, fashion, inclusive of clothing, persona, behavior, and digital representation, has an insatiable appetite of media and spectacle. The critical struggle and tension is less discernible. One exception is the hoodie that recently was apparatus for protest and a unifier of group defiance from the 2012 fatal shooting of Trayvon Martin by George Zimmerman. In 2016, Martin's images continue to influence media, sports, and entertainment, melding fashion and activism. Today, fashion and dress and behavior is more often co-opted for celebrity, self-importance, and overexposure. This fissure has led to the lessening of clothing and fashion as agency for change. The power has shifted to technology and digital channels that permit vivid and immediate challenges to social, racial, economic, and political ideologies and practices. Through data and history curation, independent journalism, shared video clips, and transitory transcribed thoughts, individuals in the 21st century are agents of disruptive and volatile change that can forage on artificiality, materiality, and emptiness and anonymity. Fashion and its signifiers, at risk of fatigue and oversaturation, are a perpetual laboratory for montages with overt nostalgia for the past. Unbridled creators and consumers in digital spaces perform testing, altering, and defining of present circumstances. Although increasingly short-lived, modern occurrences of fashion will be transformative in the world with authenticity, improvisation, and distinctiveness. Thank you.
Hi, guys. So I'm Kim Hastreiter, and I feel that I'm more of a culture person than a fashion person, so I thought I would come at it from a cultural angle tonight. Talk a little bit about where fashion comes from anyway. Where does it come from? It does not come from really the catwalk, and it does not come from fashion magazines, just so you know. Clothing design, as we all know, began eons ago with utility, whether functioning to keep you warm in the winter or protect you from enemy fire on the battlefield with camouflage. But as time passed, clothing also evolved into cultural uniforms. What you wore began to distinguish your tribe, whether you were an indigenous Indian in Peru or a Cholo gang member in LA, in East LA. Fashion also began to mirror culture, although sometimes the culture is even better than the actual fashion it inspires. A club kid who puts together an insane, customized outfit from a thrift shop can often be more outrageous than a nightlife look created by a hip designer. An old waspy guy golfing in lobster print pants with white Gucci loafers with no socks, a lime green polo, and a big gold chain might be funnier to look at than a Tom Brown lookbook. That said, I've always loved to watch fashion and culture play ping pong with each other. What ends up on the catwalk is often the result of inspirations appropriated from somewhere or something else, usually connected to the zeitgeist. I love uniforms. Army uniforms have inspired designers for years. In the late 40s, with a world war still in the air, Christian Dior designed looks for women in khaki dresses. In 1990, Isaac Mizrahi offered his beautiful Desert Storm camouflage silk gown, which you can see at the Jewish Museum right now in his show. Just last year, Marc Jacobs sent a fabulous Army uniform-inspired collection down the runway. I can't imagine how many designers around the world have designed some version of a classic pea coat in their fashion collections. We've seen everyone from Jean-Paul Gaultier to Ralph Lauren include naval uniform inspirations, from the pea coat to crisp white marine looks to navy and white striped boat neck tees and sweaters. Personally, I love to wear a uniform. In fact, I've worn the same uniform every day of my life for the past 20 years. When I created a signature look for myself based on my favorite, the Mao suit, which to me was the chicest uniform on earth. Its simplicity and boxy shape felt so right to me that once I tweaked the pattern for myself, I had 25 of them made in linen, wool, and taffeta for evening in a range of colors from classic Mao indigo to shocking pink. Sports uniforms are often seen on designer catwalks as well. Everything from football to scuba to tennis looks have inspired fashion designers over the years. But the football jersey has definitely been the most popular way to go. In 1967, the legendary and brilliant designer, whose Paolo and my friend, Jeffrey Bean, shocked the status quo when he sent a group of sequined football jersey gowns onto the runway, which is that. And as you can see, many followed over the years, from Rodarte, Jeremy Scott, to Tommy Hilfiger, to even Yeezy. The sneaker has inspired design footwear for years. I remember going nuts when Norma Kamali came out with her high-heeled rubber version in the early 80s, this shoe. Since then, designers have pushed the boundaries of what a sneaker could look like, with technology and imagination from designers like Rick Owens to Prada to Margiela. Much as army uniforms inspired designers, so did safari outfits. In 1967, Yves Saint Laurent captured the imagination of the world when he built an entire collection around the African safari to rave reviews. The fashion world lost its mind over this and opened the floodgates for safari looks to appear on catwalks everywhere. Religious style has also been a great source of material for designers over the years. One of the more recent fashion riffs comes from a blogger called Hijab Lolita, who styles herself in this mix-mash of Japanese Harajuku fruit style and Muslim hijab modesty and headwear. While Dolce & Gabbana's uber-glamorous hijab designer looks have just hit the Middle East luxury market. In the Catholic corner, oops, it's Jewish, wait. Sorry. Did I miss the Catholic? Okay, I did it in the wrong order, sorry. Gave it away. Many designers have been inspired by the striking all-black signature looks of Hasidim. In 1993, Hasidic style inspired Jean-Paul Gaultier's controversial collection, and I'll never forget the letter I got from the Anti-Defamation League after I produced a fashion spread showing these clothes in their context. Let's see, we got. In the Catholic corner, designers have morphed Catholic schoolgirls into nymphs with little tartan skirts and cardigan sweaters, and nuns' habits into curvy gowns with eccentric headwear. And we can't forget the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. Those eccentric wasp-style cues have captured the imagination of the fashion world for years. Fans include Pharrell, who shows up for award shows sometimes in bow ties, preppy pastel sweaters, and acid green Bermuda shorts. Counterculture. Well, hippie aesthetics never seem to go away. The look is raging and has transcended the music festival and thrift shop circuit, now climbing up the food chain to Alessandro Michel's new reign at Gucci, where hippie reigns supreme. Luxury fashion is definitely having a hippy-dippy moment. The most outrageous club kid to ever live, in my opinion, was the British performance artist Lee Bowery, who passed away in 1986 but left an enormous legacy from the insane and shocking costumes and original looks he created to go out at night in. We have seen his influence over the years on the catwalk at Margiela, John Galliano for Dior, and most recently in the show of Rick Owens, where he had models strapped onto other models. The street is where so much fashion starts. New York's hip-hop movement in the early 80s brought with it a huge style movement from the homeboys and girls on the streets of Uptown in Harlem and the South Bronx. With little money, but tons of style, these street-smart kids appropriated upper-class luxury symbols into a new type of original fashion that they could own and that would turn the concept of status on its ear. The star designer uptown in those days was a tailor on 125th Street named Dapper Dan. He customized suits made of bootleg Gucci logoed fabric, which were often worn with custom Louis Vuitton logoed Nikes, diamond-studded tooth grills worn with Harvard logoed sweatshirts, and giant Mercedes-Benz medallions on thick gold chains. The looks were mind-bending, as was the political statement. This style became so hot that the Korean street vendors started selling knockoffs of it all over the city. when younger designers like Tom Ford and Marc Jacobs finally began revamping these dusty old luxury fashion houses like Gucci and Vuitton in the late 90s. The first thing they did was pay homage to this uptown street style in their collections, which only ended up being knocked off yet again, selling for cheap on Canal Street. What a circle. On the darker side of the street, fashion designers like Rei Kawakubo and John Galliano offended many when they found inspiration in homelessness, creating pricey looks inspired by those who were living on the streets. It's no secret that music has had a huge impact on fashion design over the years. Hip-hop has been around since the 70s, and the styles that went along with it became hugely mass. I mean, how many zillions of pairs of baggy pants, big sneakers, and bling were sold over the past 40 years that hip-hop has been around? Punk in the 70s inspired Vivienne Westwood to open her shop in London called Seditionaries that sold her aggro collection to go with Malcolm McLaren's newest band he produced called the Sex Pistols. Designer Stephen Sprouse's entire career was inspired by music, and much of which he designed was with the Sex Pistols in mind. Then came the clowny, MDMA-fueled rave culture that inspired John Galliano and Jeremy Scott, who were just two of the designers that devoted entire collections to the genre. And of course, rock was at the core of the revolutionary looks Hedi Slimane did for the house of Saint Laurent, where he turned it upside down. Music was Slimane's mantra, musicians were his brand ambassadors and models, and the looks were only for the coolest of cool and put YSL back on the map. Of course, art has always inspired fashion. In the 30s, Salvador Dali collaborated with the designer Elsa Schiaparelli on a collection. His giant lobster painted on her gown was reappropriated a few years ago by Miuccia Prada and worn by Anna Wintour to her Met Ball gala. About 10 years ago, Takashi Murakami and Richard Prince did amazing bag collections with Vuitton for Marc Jacobs that are just beginning to show up in auction houses now. And just last year, Riccardo Tisci collaborated with artists Marina Abramovic and Kanye West with Vanessa Beecroft for their shows. And so it continues. Global natives have forever inspired fashion. But in these days of growing white privilege awareness, global style appropriation has become an uber-touchy subject. In the past decade, fashion has become off limits for a lot of cultural appropriations, especially if the culture that is being lifted is an oppressed one and the oppressor is the one referencing it. Here are some examples of global style influences and how the world reacts to a white designer or fashion lover inappropriately using certain multicultural references these days. So let's see. I believe this is Valentino, and this is D squared. Gotten a lot of trouble for that. For that, actually. That's Bob Mackie on the right. I don't know why this isn't. That's Bob Mackie's share from the past. And people were not happy with Valentino's or Italian Vogue shoot, etc. I wish I had a whole day to devote to discussing this and not just a minute, because I think we could go deep here, but I don't have time. There's more references from global, that have from global style that's influenced the catwalk. Whoops. Global customs, which I thought was fun, from men wearing skirts to people carrying their babies. This is also in the Isaac Mizrahi show at the Jewish Museum. You guys should see it if you haven't. It's really good. what comes around goes around. I put this picture because it's one of my favorites. It's when John Galliano was at Dior. This is just like the greatest redo of that Dior look, the American look. It's not news that the past is being heavily spliced into our culture every day these days. What we call referencing has always been a part of the process designers love to use as an inspiration to move forward. As an example, fashion in the 30s made a huge mark on women. The look inspired many, and years later, the legendary designer, British designer Barbara Hulanicki was such a fan of the 30s that she developed her famous London brand called Biba in the 70s and based it on it. Fast forward to 2013, Marc Jacobs created a collection inspired by his favorite collection, which was Biba era, that everyone dubbed as So 70s, but actually it was So 30s. Last but not least, the hat. Pharrell's hat. Yes, that hat that went viral big time and became an iconic a couple of years ago after he wore it to the Grammys. That oversized, punched-in hat with its own Twitter account that was eventually put on permanent display as an historic cultural relic at the Newseum. The hat that you can now buy for your Halloween costume on eBay for $24.95. By now, everyone knows that Vivienne Westwood designed this hat 34 years ago. But what many don't know is the complicated cultural context that this hat actually came from. Designed for her 1982 collection called Buffalo Gals, Westwood created this hat to accessorize her super original, mashed up looks that accompanied her music impresario husband Malcolm McLaren's newest album. McLaren and Westwood's music and fashion collaborations were groundbreaking in those days. They always released music simultaneously with fashion that together created huge cultural storms. For McLaren's quirky folk dance and hip-hop inspired scratch music, this time Westwood mix-mastered a fashion collection to go with it, borrowing folksy visual references from Peruvian mountain women, like the traditional bowler hats and full-skirted costumes they wore, seasoning it all with hints of breakdancing street-style looks that were prevalent at that point in New York City. What a crazy mashup. And then, of course, that hat, which says it all. So that, folks, is a little slice of history. I wish I had more time. I think each of these topics probably deserves a salon, but time's up. Right?
Let's all go back on stage. Please, Alphonso, Omoyemi, Penny, come on over. What an amazing group of great interpretations of both the idea of modernity. You can sit wherever you please. No, I'm going to be the last one. I like to be at the bookend, but really quite a fantastic series of examples and interpretations. And there's a lot to talk about. And I'm going to take time to ask a few questions, and then we'll see also if in the audience you have some questions. So I'm going to start with Penny. I'm going to try to go in the sequence of the speakers. So your talk focused on fashion in a moment of crisis or of change, of pivotal moment anyway. So what do you think are the most critical issues that are facing fashion today? And also thinking of what the other speakers pointed at.
Well, not one that I can give you the answer to, but I think most people would probably say the issue about sustainability. And I know there were some very interesting discussions had at the conference in Copenhagen last week.
Which conference was it?
Suddenly, I'm going to forget the title.
Oh, it doesn't matter. But it was a conference. It was a conference about fashion and sustainability.
Yeah.
Copenhagen Fashion Summit. Thanks.
But that's not something that I specifically touched on, but I think most people would say that it's sustainability and kind of in many different ways. And I know they were talking about the nomenclature for this and how we now reference it about socially responsible design as per different kinds of, there's just, it's such a big umbrella term. But I think most designers that you meet would say it's about, for them, it's about time and feeling that they're just on a kind of a whirligig of productivity. And yeah, I mean, time is something obviously I think about a lot because personally oh sure, I'm sorry. It's something I think about a lot because I came from an online background myself. That was my first experience of fashion, and I now work in publishing, print publishing, which is a much more extended process, and it's been a much more healthy environment to be engaging with fashion personally. So, you know, I'm very interested in that myself. Sorry, it's a very long answer.
No, it's not. And by the way, I'm not looking at my text messages. I have notes in here.
Who's called?
I'm like, I don't know. I'll tell you later. It's interesting because sustainability is what we're all focusing on. But sustainability doesn't only mean ecological sustainability. It's also sustainability of ritual, sustainability of human relations. And I found really beautiful what Omoyemi pointed at. I really loved the fact that you talked about modernity as respecting tradition and bringing it alive again and bringing it to life again, really, in the way we move today. There was a beautiful interpretation of modernity. And I was wondering also about the relationship with local material culture, that is so important. Do you think that that's something that African fashion, as vague a definition as that is, could teach the world, valuing local material culture?
Oh yes, I definitely think so, and I think it's very important that we reiterate it to not just designers, but consumers of African fashion as well, that, we need to be mindful of, where it's coming from. It's the cultural exchange as well. So, yes, for example, talking about tie-dye, which is not just something that you only find in Africa or in Nigeria. Indonesia has batik, and different countries have their own process as well. But it's being able to create some sort of cultural exchange as well, I think goes a long way. And of course, it's not just at the point of buying the garment. It's also about on the part of the designers as well, when you want to shop the collection. I'm not saying there always has to be a story tied to a garment, but it's, it just gives it a little bit more meaning if people have a sense of where it's from and what it's about. So I don't know if that,
it's interesting because I know design, I don't really know fashion, but I found so many parallels with everything that was discussed here. For instance, when you were also describing the dilemma of what is African fashion, right? At some point in design, and when I say design, I mean furniture design mostly and object design, we went through the same issue with Italian design, because so much of Italian design now is designed by foreigners that manufacture in Italy. So what is the imprimatur that gives the geographic location? It doesn't matter anyway. So I also wanted to ask you, having founded Lagos Fashion and Design Week and having almost defined the idea of Nigerian and also African fashion in the world, where do you see African fashion right now positioned in the global structure and system that, for instance, Penny was describing?
Oh, wow. I think it's a work in progress. And that's why it's very, very, for us, it's something that we have to, I don't want to use the word take it seriously because it is fashion at the end of the day. But at the end of the day, it's something we have to take seriously. It's how we position it. So if you think about the fact that the industry is a little bit saturated, you almost feel like you've seen it all. So for you to sort of create a voice for this, for the designers and for the work that's coming from the continent, you almost have to do a bit more. I mean, I was having a conversation with the designer, Lisa Folawi, and she's like, Omoyemi, why are you always saying this? Why do you always feel like, why do I have to have a story? So I've designed this collection, but you're saying for it to be acceptable on a global scale, now I have to tell a story? That's my story. My story is the collection. Why do I have to, so for her, it's a bit of, it's something more, but I'm holding on to the fact that for it to resonate on a global scale in a world that's really saturated from that angle of you've seen it all, nothing's really new, yes, it will be. I mean, there's an industry within Africa and, there's so many people. So yes, within Africa, they will survive. But for it to have that global relevance, you almost have to do it a bit more.
But it's always that balance between wanting that exposure and that relevance and that kind of profile versus what you hold back. And I'm thinking, obviously I'm thinking about Scotland. I'll speak for Scotland. The erosion of many of the artisanal skills in the textile industry, it went too quickly, and so many of them are closing down. And I know Chanel have been very generous in supporting one very famous fashion textile house, but there are many others that have gone. And we look to, say, Japan, and they've been so brilliant at preserving their craftsmanship, etc. So there's this kind of rush to embrace globalism, and you wonder, at what cost that enthusiasm can be. How, what steps can be taken to preserve that sense of specificity. The number of young fashion weeks that I attend, where you're looking for that national specificity. You travelled there to see what South Korean fashion might look like, and lo and behold, it looks like a kind of slightly watered down version of Celine. You've travelled to find out. Well, in some houses, I exaggerate, but you're travelling, and you're too late.
Well, maybe that's Korea's special.
Oh, sorry, Korea. I'm catastrophizing.
No, but you're right, because we do have that problem, and for us it's different because the designers suddenly feel the pressure that for the clothes, for people to be able to buy the clothes, so they want to water it down. They want to, because our culture is very celebratory, so everything is occasion wear. But now people are trying to compete with brands with everyday clothing, so they water it down. So they want to, they want to sell a shirt or a pair of jeans. So you will come and, and you question, what are the elements of design in this collection? What are you showing me? It's so simple, it's so basic. So that's it. I don't think it's something that can happen overnight. I think it's talking to them, over and over again. Guys, this is what makes you special. This is what makes you really unique. This is what gives you that voice. It's your heritage. But don't get me wrong, at the same time, we have to also think about how the whole process has to be commercialized. So if we're holding on to, let's make, keep all the traditional heritage and keep all the craftsmanship alive, yes, but at what cost? So how many garments can you order from that designer, bearing in mind that it's just a little community of people that are making those clothes? So you have a state, for example, Ogun State, and their own thing is, how do we make this process a bit more commercial? But we still want to hold on to what we have because they know what it is.
It's complicated, because I was also thinking, you wanted to add something?
Well, I just was going to say, look at America, everybody doesn't make Ralph Lauren clothes here, or they don't just, what is America famous for? I mean, it's everywhere, in every country.
Mm-hmm. No, it's true. And, Alphonso was talking about the political agency that was assigned to clothes up to a certain point. And if I understood correctly what you were saying, you said today, clothes have lost quite a bit of that political agency. Was I right to understand it that way?
Yes, I think
Yeah,
so.
because I was like, whoa, I put a lot of exclamation marks. Yeah, so maybe it has to do also with the fact that there's admiration, that there's this kind of homogenization. But please, go ahead. Tell me what you think.
Yeah, I think in America, and that's where my research comes from, I think their clothes are being challenging political systems outside of America. Hope you can hear me. Outside of America, and I look at like what's going on in the immigration into Europe. I looked at the image that you showed of the Rana factory collapse. And when that movie was shown at our school, and I thought of the bodies with clothes laying on top of them, and that in a sense, those women and men we're trying to seek modernity through the making of clothes, but in the end, we see this picture of them being like covered by the clothes that, in the process of making them, killed them, put them at risk of working in a factory that wasn't up to code. I think, again, some other panelists touched on technology, and I think, especially in America right now, I think clothing has become very pedestrian, and I think the youth, especially, are going to the Instagram, Pinterest, and that's how they're challenging the system. And we saw a lot of that with the Trayvon Martin protest, and the ongoing ones right now with the Black
Lives Matter?
Black Lives Matter. So.
Yeah, by the way, tomorrow we're going to discuss the hoodie. That's our H. Yeah. So, and Kim, you made this wonderful survey of sources of inspiration for fashion, and I was wondering, the street will remain a source of inspiration, but I was wondering which street, you know? So I wanted to ask you,
Everywhere.
yeah, everywhere, but so many streets have changed and have become kind of sanitized. So if you look at New York City, there's the eternal cry of where are the kids right now. They're actually on Walker and Broadway, where I live, I can tell you that.
Chinatown.
Yeah,
Chinatown.
in Chinatown, I know, they're all there right now. No, but seriously, where do you see new sources coming from? I mean, do you think that science will ever be an inspiration for fashion?
I mean, that's a tool, you know, the technology is a tool. Ideas aren't tools. You don't find an idea in a computer. It's not going to give you an idea. Ideas come from people.
And there are some of my peeps, some of my geeks here that will prove her wrong.
Ideas come often from people who are challenged, maybe, with resources. You have to be resourcefulness is the best, you know, most fertile ground for ideas, I think. So often you'll find it in disenfranchised places, the most amazing, genius ideas, because people are forced not to be able to buy the idea. They have to innovate in their heads.
I remember years ago interviewing John Galliano. I think it was the time of that Madame Butterfly couture show. Yeah. And he took me into the showroom, and he had those books that he used to compile when he did his famous research trips. I think it was at the start of the autumn-winter season. He'd go for 3 weeks or something, and he'd do a different continent or a different country and, you know, appropriate wildly in these scrapbooks. And I remember that one he'd been in... he'd been looking at lots of street Japanese kids, and it was all interwoven into the couture dresses, etc. But hearing you say that really strikes me. None of those designers would ever get 3 weeks to go on a research trip now.
Mm-hmm. That's something that I know nothing about.
That's why they're all quitting.
Huh?
Yeah.
That's why they're all quitting.
I fear I don't want to end on a negative note, but it's a real concern. There's no research happening.
So interesting. I want to open it up to the audience. Are there questions or comments that are coming from any of you? There's one over there. Okay. If you don't mind just introducing yourself.
Hello, Paula. This is Bill T. Jones here.
Hi, Bill.
How are you? I think the gentleman in the end said something that's really very important.
That's Alphonso, yeah.
And what you said about the factory, the Sana factory? Rana.
The Rana.
And it's back to the question of those people, it's poetically put, but I'm not sure if we're hitting it on the head. Those people were trying to participate in modernism, modernity. Is what you said, modernity?
Economic, yes.
Yes. I thought that was the way we should think about what you were trying to do, Paul, in the beginning. What is it? I think to be of your time is to live. Now, if you're going to use those people as an example, we all are trying to live in the moment that we're in. And the expression of that desire to live in the moment that we're in is what modernity is. And it's a tragic thing that they were trying to participate in a global market. No, they were not trying to be fashionable, but they were trying to be present, and they died doing it. Thank you very much for that. It gives me an insight into how the term actually lands.
Yeah, and I'd just like to add to that. I think most of my research takes place with jazz artists from the 20s and 30s and 40s. And to me, they, again, similar to your comment, they were not, if you saw the images that I showed, it was nothing different than what white Americans were wearing at the time. The difference is that there was an agency behind them putting on the clothing. They were defying the system. They were also, you can't separate the music. The music was innovative. They were taking, they were attempting new expressions that weren't, that were in the media were discouraged and put down. The music, ragtime, was called ragged music. It was called music that was disgusting. Ragtime dancing or cakewalking was considered demeaning. And so really, the jazz artists really challenged the system. And I think, to me, everything gets back to improvisation, authenticity, and agency. And I think, especially nowadays, sometimes there's a lost, we lose what's the end goal? Who are, through protest, what is the outcome going to be? And is the group still considered? Like, who are they fighting for? And I think nowadays it's difficult to find that, especially when the protest occurs online.
Interesting. There's a gentleman on the, say, 4th row from the back in the middle, and then we'll get to the, yeah. Mm-hmm. Also, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself.
Hello, my name is Asher Levine.
Oh, hi, Asher.
Hi, Paola. You had some great runway images from your presentations. Great presentations, by the way. My question is on the runway, everything is so exciting, but then when you look around on the street, it's actually kind of boring. Why do you think fashion is so boring?
Yeah, who wants to answer this?
Meaning on the street when people, after people buy the clothes, how they put it together? Is that what you mean?
I mean, someone said it before that fashion is kind of boring right now, or fashion's dead in terms of, I think, style. Why do you think it's kind of boring in terms of looking at fashion in the masses? And why hasn't it really changed?
I mean, I don't think it's more boring than it's ever been, but I feel like you can always see amazingness. It's just where you're looking. You know, maybe the places have changed where you see it. You used to see it on the streets of New York. You don't see that anymore, but it doesn't mean doesn't exist elsewhere.
Well, I mean, it's fair to say we have gone through a period, the last 5 years, has been very good taste. And
you say it as if it were something disgusting.
Oh, certainly not. I mean, I'm personally quite anti-fantasy, but yeah. So there hasn't been a great deal of kind of fantastical fashion, and the way that it's been even represented on the runway, as you say, the grand spectacles of the McQueen shows of kind of 10 years ago, 15 years ago, that they barely exist, apart from in the huge big kind of industry spectaculars, and they're roadshow kind of presentations that I was talking about, and they're a slightly different thing. But I think that actually, personally, I find quite a lot of excitement in the kind of normcore aspects of fashion that we've seen recently, and the kind of the uniform and the wardrobe and the garment versus fashion. I think that they've been quite empowering to a lot of women's wardrobes. But I would say actually, probably that phase has kind of come to a close, and we're seeing something a little bit more sort of sensual on one end, and then something a little bit more kind of street-based and kind of rough at the other. So you won't be that bored for long by all forecasts, I would say.
I mean, the windows at Barney's, the Hood by Air windows, are an example of, you know, a little try.
There was another question here in the middle. You got to lift your hands a little higher. Yay! There it comes. It's coming. And then did I see somebody down here? Oh, it was you. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Hi, Paola.
Hi.
It's Leanne Shapton. Hi.
Oh, Leanne Shapton. Hi.
I think I'm probably asking 5 questions in one, but I'm trying to bring it all back to this idea of modernity and the modern. But I think it's in the May issue of probably British Vogue. There's a piece on, you know, black activists, and the byline or the subhead says black activists make great muses or something like that. And
muses?
This editorial is shot at the Cotton Club, and it has all of these. It's a fashion editorial. not a single black designer in it, where does this authenticity come in? And Kim talking about all of your sources, like maybe I'm thinking, is the modern part of fashion that there really isn't any critique about when something like this happens? It's sort of this wonderful, I don't want to be politically correct about this, but this is sort of how it goes. And, where does that discrepancy come together? Will it ever? Will Italians always be inspired by black activists, but then African fashion won't be represented in a mainstream magazine? So how modern is that? And will that change, or is that the beauty of fashion?
Do you want to take it, Kim? Because we were discussing.
So this actually existed? Because you said there was a fashion spread?
Yeah.
In an Italian magazine?
No, British Vogue, I think.
In British Vogue, right now?
Yeah.
I'm shocked that would be allowed to happen in a way, right now.
It was very well produced.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Did you see it? Anybody here see it?
I've heard of it.
Are people outraged?
What is outrageous about it? I would like to understand.
I think it's just
recent?
kind of run-of-the-mill what we expect from fashion editorials.
are the models African or African American?
Yes, but the designers, no.
But so, could it be an homage? I don't want to answer, you answer, but we've gone through something similar in another salon. Go ahead.
Sorry, for someone like me from the African continent, we see this all the time. So
Yeah.
So I'm like, did you really just ask that question? It's our reality.
Yeah.
It's gone from tribal, they call it, it's either tribal, it's either ethnic, there are different names for it, but there's no reference in an African fashion designer. Not that they're absent, there's some, none's probably broken even on that sort of status, that global scale. But reality is they exist and you know where they are, and they're editorials all the time.
Yeah, I'm
mentioned.
almost sort of want to leapfrog the fact that this is it is so common, it happens all the time. But is there a sense of what is modern about fashion in the fact that this happens over and over again, isn't necessarily on the op-ed page of, the New York. Like, it's just what's happening.
I personally don't think, there's a conscious thinking about it, and it's being perceived as modern, because when you see that, there's always a backlash. Valentino's Spring Summer 16 got a backlash. Mac's got a current campaign. There's a backlash.
D squared.
Pardon?
D squared. Even Native American.
So
backlash.
it's yes. If it's being perceived as modern, you probably wouldn't hear about it, and people would just think that's the norm. It just happens, and but people are talking about it, so it means that it's now, it's current. People are not going to be quiet about it. It's always,
Alphonso, you wanted to say something about this?
Yeah, I was going to say that I think that's a problem we're going to experience as we go further in this digital age, is that you don't have to be authentic anymore because people don't know. I'll throw out a few examples. Rick Owens had a show a few seasons ago where he used, I think, dancers, female dancers that were kind of using the dance, what we call African American stepping, which comes from religious kind of African dance that was brought to America. And kind of all that information was lost, and when people saw it, all they saw was stepping. They didn't understand anything about the religious aspect of it, how it came from slavery. So in this digital age, there's really a lot of loss of authenticity and a lot of storytelling that takes place on TV, and in other places, the story's not complete. And recently, there was a story about Bessie Smith, the movie, Bessie with Queen Latifah, and the story of Bessie's life didn't really finish in the movie. So a lot of people don't have the full picture unless they go out and seek truth and authenticity. Often, because what happens nowadays in the digital age, again to wrap up, is that so many people are putting online their own curation of information, history, and sometimes it's not complete.
But can I ask you, if it's done well, and if it's a new reality and a new authenticity, is it bad? Like, when people ask me my favorite Italian restaurant in New York, I say it's Basta Pasta, because it's Japanese people doing Italian food. It's much more interesting. So is there an instance in which that can be respectful and appreciated also by the original authentics?
It can be, but if you look at, again, at the university that I teach at, and then we see sometimes that the students don't have the full story because they're getting partial or incorrect information from online or from movies that they watch that don't really tell the full narrative. So that's where it becomes problematic, because then you have a generation that starts referencing and appropriating, but then they're doing it incorrectly because they don't understand.
So it's the oppressor and the oppressed, as
Like
you
what
say.
Marc Jacobs, appropriating Biba, not realizing he was appropriating the 1930s, really.
But I guess that when it comes to slavery and to racial history that is not well known, then it becomes much more sinful and a problem. Yeah, I understand. Okay, let's go over there, and then Dawn will come to you. Over there, raised, yeah, you see she's raising it. And then we can have a microphone ready down here, so.
Hi, Paola. Galia here.
Oh, Galia, by the way, designed the installation for Isaac Mizrahi, so she knows that show really well.
I'm not in fashion, I'm an architect, so apologies for if what I'm going to say is out of place. I think the difference that you brought up between modernism, modernity, and the Heidegger quote relate to what Alphonso is saying, in the sense that Heidegger refers to being of our time and connected to our suffering, to existentialism and individualism, so connected to a different form of suffering than historical, medieval tragedy in a way. And so I think the danger when you detach a dance or a move that comes from slavery and religious movements, and you only make it into a style, is the detachment of the difficulties or the tragic or the connection to life and to existentialism in a way.
So it's anti-modern in a way.
Yeah, exactly. It becomes a style. Modernism, like you show the image of the urbanist, German urbanist as modernism, and that to us architects it's when modern becomes a style and not rooted into the suffering or the moment or anything that has to do with art is a connection between life and death and the bigger questions of life. And so I think the issue is the connection to the moment. And so when Kim is talking about the connection to the street, I appreciate that because I see in the street a lot of uniqueness, but it's not fashionable uniqueness. It's something heartfelt. It's
cultural.
Exactly. Yeah.
Thank you. That was a good point. Dawn, this is Dawn Barber. Yeah. Oh, you have it.
Thank you, Paola. I just was interested in what you all really feel about what do you think technology's role is now in fashion?
Yeah, Dawn is the co-founder of Creative Tech Week. She just finished her tour de force, so I'm sure that what Alphonso said was,
yeah, and Alphonso in particular, because he's at a university. I understand that Drexel has obviously a great reputation in that regard. But in wearables and just in technology in general, particularly as it relates to the question about modernity.
So your question is how they feel about technology?
What role that it plays in fashion today, or perhaps more importantly, will play?
Kim, go.
I mean, I'm a contrarian, but I think technology companies shouldn't make fashion. And I think fashion companies shouldn't make technology.
Yay, I like that. No, they can try.
I don't want to buy an Hermes bag that pays my bills for me.
That would be a little dangerous.
And I also don't want to wear an Apple Watch. So.
Alphonso.
I think technology is great. I worked in the fashion industry for many years, and when I got into the industry, we did everything manually. That's why there were plenty of jobs, because you needed 20 or 30 assistant designers to do everything. But over the time, the computer came into to the design studio, and we were able to do a lot of things in an automated fashion. So I think, you can't run or hide from technology. It's going to happen. And what I've discovered on the campus of teaching students is that it allows them to approach fashion design in a way they never thought of. They come up with ideas that, aided by the computer, that they wouldn't be able to do on the tabletop, doing flat pattern or draping. So I think it's a great thing.
It's a tool, right?
It's a tool.
Yeah.
They still have to have their skills and the foundation.
I mean, from where I'm coming from, and in a continent, I mean, Nigeria in particular, with 170 million people, and you're still trying to look for opportunities to create jobs for people, I think technology is going to encroach on that space. So in a way, yes, there's this, we want to do it fast, in a way, so that, fashion can be accessible to all the people we're talking about. But at the same time, we're thinking of fashion as holistically from the value chain. And it can, I mean, now that we know how much 1 barrel of oil costs, so we have to look at creative industries, and fashion is playing a key role. So if technology were to replace human hands within the value chain, that is not, where we would want to be right now, because we're still trying to ensure that there's job creation and wealth creation. So from our perspective, I would say technology is great, but can you just give us a bit more time so we can?
Yeah. Penny?
Well, if I'd been here about 10 years ago, I was then the editor of a website called Show Studio, which I'd started editing in 2001, when really there was no technology in fashion. Very difficult to find a stylist who had an email account, actually. And if you tried to approach any photographer, it really wasn't of any value to them whatsoever, because they couldn't print it out and put it, whatever they were going to make for you, in their portfolio. They had no currency. But, at that time I was evangelical. I would have told you that it was going to be the future, and that advertisers were going to put all their money into online advertising, and that it was there had been an incontrovertible shift, and everything was going to become digitized, and it was going to be full of interactive joyousness. And actually what happened after 2.0 was that they kind of threw away the prize and won a coconut. The mistake was to think that it was going to give us ideas. Actually, it's been a fantastic enabler, an amazing tool, and it's, of course, economically and internationally, there are brilliant things about it, but it has obfuscated many of the important processes of research and nurturing that are necessary to fostering designers. So it's not that it itself is a pernicious thing. I just think that its management has been extremely detrimental, in my opinion. So I feel like we're about to come through a great new phase where we're going to rethink our attitudes towards digital and use it intelligently.
You're
at last.
evangelical even now.
Yeah, I am.
Yeah.
But there's been a kind of fugue, is my opinion.
I think it's super interesting to watch the 20-year-olds because, they're natives, so yet they are, standing in line to support Bernie Sanders, a 74-year-old Luddite, and they really love an original gangster, and they love analog as well, and appreciate analog, and I think that, it's worth, kind of watching and listening to them.
Well, this is good job. Go on, Omoyemi.
I mean, I was just reading an article as well that Polaroid, cameras are coming back. So we've all gone through that phase where you take a photo on your phone, and now Polaroid cameras are being sold for £229 in Selfridges. There's a whole community of people now who are really investing. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's still a bit of technology infused into all of that. But isn't that what humans are? So it's almost like, okay, yes, it's all digitized, it's accessible, it's there, but maybe we want to go back to touching and feeling that photo. We want to make a picture. So technology is great, but sometimes you just want to go back to that whole process of being involved as well. So
I think the next phase will be a reconciliation of the two. I think if we can get a kind of haptic world in digital, that's the next thing. And haven't worked out how to do it with a magazine yet, but that's...
You'll
what
get
we're going to
there.
do.
But Alphonso has to close because you've been talking about technology quite a bit and digital versus physical. So what is your prediction for the future? How are we going to metabolize technology so that it doesn't... Yeah? Come on.
Well, I think 3D printing and the stuff that Nike's working on, Under Armour, I think it's going to be part of our lives, and we'll be wearing it. I'm wearing a jacket down there that's seam-sealed technology.
That's what?
Seam-sealed technology. So
What is SimSilt?
it prevents water from entering your
Oh,
garment. So it's a way to seal seams instead of a stitched by machine. It's sealed with a tape
Gosh, I have
and
to really learn a lot
adhesive
here.
heat. So
Yeah, it's amazing. In our academic that comes from the industry, he has like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. It's like so great. Well, I have to say this was incredible. If I have to distill something from the evening, I mean, there's a lot to think of, but this idea of being in the moment and being connected to the world, and also what Galia reminded us of, our moment is made also of history. So being able, no matter what we do, to take everything that comes with it today, but knowing also about the past, about tradition, about material culture, is really what makes us the most modern. And tomorrow we're going to explore it, going through these 26 of these items, some of which also were referenced tonight, or some of which were already brought up without knowing tonight. We're going to talk about the Dutch walk, so Omoyemi will talk about it. We're going to have the hoodie. We're going to talk about Rana Plaza. It's going to be quite a great day. And we're going to start tomorrow at 9:30, and it's going to be in the other theater. I have to ask you, if you are already confirmed, please come. If you're not, it might be a much tighter theater, so there's going to be a great live streaming. But for tonight, I just really, really want to thank Alphonso and Kim and Penny and Omoyemi, who went through so much to make it here. Thank you. You've been wonderful. I want to thank the wonderful team that made tonight possible. I'm going to thank them 1,500 times, Michelle, Stephanie, Marili, and everybody else. And thank you for coming here on a Sunday night instead of going for your nice Sunday night dinner. Thank you. Thank you. This was great.